Um, Usually when we talk about, a scientific diagnosis, there is this fundamental expectation of precision. Like, think about basic engineering or medicine, right?
Right, yeah. You expect clear answers.
Exactly. Like, say you fall off a ladder, your arm swells up, and you go to the hospital. The doctor puts you in an x-ray machine, pulls up that black and white image, and just points to a jagged white line on the screen. And they say, well, there it is. Bone is broken.
Yeah, it's a totally binary system. I mean, the line is either there or it isn't. The boundary between a functional bone and a broken one is visually undeniable right there on the screen.
Broken or not broken, it's clean, and honestly, it's kind of comforting. We naturally gravitate toward that kind of visible, neatly categorized reality. We just really want the world to have hard boundaries.
We do, yeah. It makes things easier to process.
But then you step into the realm of complex systems and you start asking these massive questions about how a living, breathing, thinking human being somehow emerges from like a soup of basic chemical elements, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just utterly useless.
It really is. I mean, it is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Right. Because we find ourselves looking at a landscape that is just entirely murky.
Exactly. The moment you attempt to draw a sharp, clean line to separate, say, the mind from the biological life,
Yeah.
and then try to separate that biological life from the physical matter it's made of, well, those clean lines completely vanish.
So just gone.
Yeah, you're left trying to find a border that simply might not exist in the way we want it to.
And that murkiness, the total failure of those clean lines is exactly the territory we are mapping out today for you. We are going to forensically examine this century-old text that secretly predicted the future of complex system science.
And it does it by diagnosing exactly why our mental x-ray machines were failing in the first place.
Yes. So we are looking specifically, and I mean strictly, at Chapter 1 of J.C. Smuts' 1926 book, Holism and Evolution. But before we go a single step further, we really need to establish some ground rules for this deep dive.
Oh, absolutely. The ground rules are vital here because the historical context around this specific author and, this specific book is incredibly vast.
It's a minefield, honestly.
It really is. I mean, if we aren't careful, we could spend hours just spiraling into historical biography or debating the downstream political and social movements that tried to co-opt his ideas over the last 100 years.
Right, which we are absolutely not doing. We are putting on severe analytical blinders today. No downstream derivations, no biographical tangents.
Strictly the text.
Strictly the text. We are isolating Chapter 1. We are working with a very specific, carefully curated stack of sources for this. We've got the original 1926-page scans. We have the Variorum editions, which track the exact textual adjustments, word substitutions, and punctuation changes he made in the 1927 and 1936 editions.
Which was fascinating on their own, by the way.
Oh, totally. And to cap it off, we have a stack of cutting-edge 2026 Centenary critical reviews. Primarily, we're relying on Eugene Pretorius's annotated gradientology analysis.
That's a phenomenal paper.
It really is. So our mission today is to look at this single opening chapter as basically a masterclass in philosophical demolition and reconstruction.
Demolition is really the perfect word for what occurs in these pages. I mean, Chapter 1 achieves something that borders on the unbelievable from a philosophical standpoint.
It's wild.
It is. It systematically dismantles the entire framework of 19th century mechanical science. It diagnoses precisely why that scientific framework was conceptually blind to the realities of life and mind. And then it just lays the theoretical groundwork for modern complex systems theory.
And the craziest part, it does all of this without ever actually defining the word holism.
Yeah, that is just such a bold move.
That is the part that completely blew my mind on the first read. He doesn't even define the title of his own book in the very first chapter.
Not once.
It is a total scorched earth teardown of bad ideas. He just insists on clearing the foundational rot before he permits himself to build anything new.
Exactly. He's clearing the brush.
So we are going to start this investigation at the most literal physical surface possible. We're looking at the architecture of the printed page itself.
Which is where that Pretorius review really shines.
Oh, yeah. The 2026 Centenary Review makes this fascinating argument that if you look at the raw 1926-page scans, the typography isn't just a stylistic choice made by some random publisher. The layout is actually a material witness to the argument Smuts is about to unleash.
Right. Pretorius refers to this as typographic reification.
Typographic reification. Okay, break that down for us.
So when you open that 1926 edition and you start reading, you immediately notice that Smuts is systematically capitalizing specific words throughout the text, like everywhere.
Right, I noticed that right away. It's really jarring.
Yeah, he capitalizes matter, life, mind, process, and reality. Now, in standard English grammar, you obviously don't capitalize matter or life unless it happens to be the first word of a sentence, right?
Right, it looks almost like a typo at first.
Exactly. But it's not standard practice, and it's not a mistake. Smuts is intentionally weaponizing the capitalization rules of the English language.
He's taking common nouns and just forcing them to operate as proper nouns.
That's exactly what he's doing, and it serves this profound philosophical purpose. He isn't just, playing with grammar for fun. He is visually constructing an ontological hierarchy right there on the page.
Wow. So the font itself is making an argument.
Yes. By elevating these specific nouns, he forces you, the reader, to treat these concepts not as mere descriptive labels for random stuff we observe in the world. He is framing them as active constitutive kingdoms or world.
Kingdoms of reality.
Right. The text visually demands that you acknowledge these aren't just filing cabinets in the human vocabulary. They are the territorial stages of a massive cosmic ladder.
It is a total visual power move before you even parse the meaning of the sentences. But the architecture gets even stranger when you look at the structural layout of the very first page.
Oh, the 3 paragraphs, yeah.
3 paragraphs. So the chapter opens with a section that is explicitly labeled summary. And it just sits there, barricaded from the rest of the text, before the main chapter even officially begins.
Just kind of hovering there.
Yeah. And for a century, scholars apparently just skimmed right past this, treating it like a standard preface, just a little bit of throat clearing before the real intellectual work started.
Which was a massive mistake on their part.
A huge mistake, because Pretorius's close reading reveals this is not a summary at all. It is a compressed, highly pressurized, dialectical blueprint of the entire massive book.
It's the entire thesis, just completely coiled up and hiding in plain sight.
I found myself thinking about it not like a movie trailer. A trailer just gives you a superficial highlight reel of explosions and punchlines. I thought about it more like a strand of DNA.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Because if you look at a DNA sequence, every single instruction required to build the rest of the complex organism is tightly coiled inside that microscopic structure. That is exactly what these 3 paragraphs are doing.
They absolutely are.
So let's break that blueprint down for everyone because it really dictates everything we are about to discuss today.
Let's do it.
Okay, so paragraph 1 acts as the diagnostic. It identifies this massive, glaring paradox at the heart of science. It points out that matter, life, and mind are treated as completely disparate, isolated concepts by our academic disciplines, yet they somehow meet and intermingle effortlessly in human experience.
Right. They clash violently in our scientific theories, but they cooperate seamlessly inside you and me.
Exactly. Then we move to paragraph 2, which acts as the immanent critique. This paragraph plants a very specific kind of dangerous logical time bomb.
It really is a trap.
It is. It argues that if you genuinely accept the scientific theory of evolution, you are logically forced to completely revolutionize your concept of matter.
Which physicists were not ready for.
Not at all. And finally, paragraph 3 provides the methodological toolset. It introduces this highly novel concept of fields as the ultimate remedy for the rigid, hard-edged, compartmentalized science of the 19th century.
And all of that incredibly dense architecture is established before the chapter even officially starts its first numbered section.
It's just staggering efficiency.
It is, and the brilliance of that 3-paragraph structure is that it perfectly sets up the fundamental problem statement of the text, which Smuts identifies as the 3 great gaps.
Right, the great gaps.
Because the core problem is that human knowledge has artificially walled off these 3 domains. Physics studies matter. Biology studies life. Psychology studies mind.
And never the twain shall meet.
Exactly. When you look at them through these isolated disciplines, they appear utterly unlike each other. There is no obvious conceptual bridge connecting a silent, inert rock to a dividing biological cell to the subjective experience of a conscious thought.
They just seem like totally different universes.
They do. The differences seem absolute, and this creates these massive, unbridgeable breaks in our scientific knowledge.
The great gaps. Science basically looks at the universe and declares that these 3 things are fundamentally mechanically disconnected. But here is the pivot, and it is a brilliant epistemic maneuver. Smuts looks at this massive, seemingly unsolvable scientific paradox, and he addresses it with a single devastating word.
Yet.
Yet. He says, yet they are all three in experience. I mean, just think about that for a second. You listening to this deep dive right now, you are a living entity compounded of matter, life, and mind.
You're all three at once.
You are made of chemical elements. Those elements are arranged in a living biological system, and that living system is currently generating the conscious thought required to process my words.
This is the crux of his entire epistemological foundation right here.
Yeah.
Smuts points out that if there truly were no common basis to matter, life, and mind-like, if they were as fundamentally isolated as 19th century science claimed, then their union in the human individual would be the greatest, most inexplicable mystery of the universe.
It would be magic.
It would be a daily miracle. His argument is that what is in fact united in human experience cannot possibly be infinitely far asunder in human thought. Unless, of course, our human thought processes and scientific models are just completely detached from reality.
Which is exactly what he's implying. He is basically looking at the greatest scientific minds of the 1920s and saying, look in the mirror. You are breathing, thinking meat.
Yes.
If your sophisticated physics and biology models dictate that matter, life, and mind cannot possibly interact, but you are currently walking around interacting with the world, then the fundamental nature of reality isn't broken. Your models are broken.
The philosophical term for what Smuts is doing here is setting up a transcendental argument.
Okay, hold on. Let's make sure we define that clearly before we apply it to Smuts, because that's a heavy term.
Yeah.
What exactly separates a transcendental argument from, just a standard logical deduction? Why is it such a powerful tool in this specific context?
That's a great question.
Oh.
So, a standard deduction moves from general premises to a specific conclusion. If A is true and B is true, then C must be true.
Right, classic logic.
But a transcendental argument works in reverse. It starts with an undeniable, observable, empirical fact in this case, the absolute unity of human experience.
Right.
You are alive, you are made of matter, and you think. That is undeniable.
I can't argue with that.
Right. So the transcendental argument then asks, what must necessarily be true about the universe for this undeniable fact to even be possible?
Oh, I see.
If human experience fluidly unites these three disparate kingdoms, then our scientific concepts must yield to that lived experience, not the other way around. He is demanding that we fix our broken conceptual vocabulary rather than deny the obvious reality of our own existence.
Wow. So the gap is not out there in nature.
No.
The gap is entirely in our heads.
Exactly. It's a conceptual failure.
It is such an audacious claim. I mean, he is telling physicists who have literally just mapped the atom that their basic vocabulary is conceptually bankrupt.
He's not making any friends in the physics department, that's for sure.
Definitely not. But, diagnosing a bad vocabulary is one thing. If our concepts are truly that broken, if they have dug trenches so deep that they create these massive false gaps in our knowledge, how on earth do you fix them?
It's a huge undertaking.
Right, because you can't just stand outside a physics laboratory and yell at people to change their minds. They'll just ignore you. And that leads us into Smuts' methodological genius.
Which is just so satisfying to read.
It is, because he doesn't launch an attack on 19th century mechanical science from the outside. He destroys their bad ideas from the inside using their own logic.
Yeah, the 2026 Critical Review spends a lot of time analyzing this, and they refer to it as an immanent critique.
Immanent critique.
Yes, and it is a devastatingly effective philosophical weapon when it's deployed correctly. Smuts deliberately refuses to import his own holistic, unified values to critique materialism.
Why not?
Well, he is acutely aware that if he simply announces, hey guys, I believe the cosmos is a unified holistic entity, the hardened materialists of his day will just dismiss him as a mystic or a poet.
Oh, right. They just laugh him out of the room.
Exactly. They wouldn't take him seriously. So instead, he takes the materialist's own, most cherished foundational belief, and he uses it to dissolve their entire worldview from within.
It's intellectual judo.
It really is. Specifically, he uses their staunch belief in the theory of evolution to destroy their static concept of matter.
Okay, walk us through the mechanics of that trap, because the way he sets it up is so precise it feels like a legal cross-examination.
It does feel very legalistic. So, by the time Smuts is writing in the 1920s, the scientific establishment had widely and firmly accepted Darwinian evolution.
It was the bedrock of biological science by then.
Completely. They accepted the premise that biological life emerged over vast stretches of time from inorganic, lifeless matter. Furthermore, they accepted that conscious mind eventually emerged from that biological life.
Okay, standard evolutionary timeline.
Right. So Smuts approaches them and says, essentially, I accept your premise.
Hmm.
Let us proceed with evolution as absolute truth. But then he closes the trap.
Here it comes.
He says, if you claim that life organically evolved from matter, then that original, seemingly dead matter must have secretly held the promise and potency of life within it from the very beginning.
Oh, wow. I see. You can't get blood from a stone unless the stone inherently possessed the chemical and physical potential to produce blood all along.
Precisely the point. Therefore, matter cannot possibly be the inert, dead, strictly mechanical, passive stuff that 19th century physics defined it as.
Right, because if it was truly dead, nothing could ever come from it.
Exactly. If matter possesses the capacity to eventually give birth to a living, breathing, adapting organism, then matter itself must be wildly creative. It must be pregnant with potential and incredibly dynamic.
It has to be.
The materialist's own premise that evolution is the undisputed history of the universe
Yeah.
completely destroys their foundational conclusion that matter is just a collection of dead, mechanical atoms passively bouncing off each other in a void.
So they are contradicting themselves.
Totally. Smuts proves they are trying to hold two fundamentally contradictory ideas in their heads at the exact same time. A static, dead, mechanical view of matter alongside a dynamic, progressive, highly creative view of evolution.
He traps them in a logical paradox of their own making. He's basically telling them, you can't play this convenient in and out game.
You can't have your cake and eat it too.
Right. You cannot invoke the concept of matter to explain the glorious, complex origin of life and then rigidly define matter in a way that makes the emergence of life mathematically and philosophically impossible.
It is absolute intellectual checkmate.
But here is what separates Smuts from, a lot of armchair philosophers. He doesn't just drop the mic and walk away after making that point.
Now he doubles down.
He immediately turns around and pushes his own argument to the absolute breaking point. There is this specific paragraph in the paragraph 5, sentences 12 through 17, that Pretorius calls the formal dialectical climax of the chapter.
And astoundingly, readers largely ignored its significance for 100 years.
Which is crazy to me. Because here, Smuts introduces what we can call the impossible task objection.
The inclusion of this objection demonstrates profound intellectual honesty on his part. Smuts takes a pause in his dismantling of science to actually build up the skeptic's case against his own project to its maximum, most lethal force.
He argues against herself.
He does. He asks this devastating question. How can human thought possibly reform or alter the fundamental concept of matter?
Right.
Matter is the physical stuff of the universe.
Yeah.
It exists essentially outside of thought. It is hard, impervious, and totally indifferent to our opinions.
It doesn't care what we think about it.
Exactly. So how can the human mind, which is just a tiny, recent, localized byproduct of the universe, stand outside the universe and measure the whole thing? He literally writes the words, "Our standard of measurement is inadequate. Our task, therefore, impossible."
Okay, I have to stop you there because I am channeling the listener right now, and this is the exact objection I had when I read this section.
It's a very natural reaction.
It sounds dangerously close to a semantic shell game. Like, if I drop a literal 50-pound iron anvil on my foot, my concept of the anvil doesn't shatter my toe. The physical matter of the anvil does.
Right. Gravity and iron do the work.
Yeah. So isn't Smuts just changing the dictionary definition of the word matter in his head to make his philosophical math work out? How does thinking about matter differently change what it physically does in the real world?
That is the exact instinct Smuts is anticipating. And honestly, your anvil analogy is the perfect way to test it. Smuts responds to this anxiety by drawing a severe, critical distinction between the thing in itself, the actual physical matter of the iron anvil, and the human concept of matter.
Okay, so he's splitting them apart.
Yes. He concedes your point entirely regarding the physical anvil. He writes, the answer is that, while mind or thought may not have made matter, it has undoubtedly assisted in making the concept of matter.
Oh. Okay, so it's not a semantic trick.
Not at all. It is an exercise in profound epistemological hygiene.
So he is demanding that we recognize we have been severely confusing the map with the territory.
Yes. The map is the concept. The territory is reality. The physical anvil dropping on your foot, that is the territory. The 19th century mechanical physics textbook that claims the anvil is made of dead, inert, non-creative particles, that is the map.
Right, and the map was drawn by humans.
Exactly. Because the human mind actively constructed that map. And because the mind loaded that map with what Smuts calls unsifted tradition and deeply inadequate empirical knowledge, the mind is fully authorized and, in fact, obligated to redraw that map.
Wow.
Smuts is arguing that the mind is already inside the object it seeks to reform. He removed the impenetrable barrier between the observer and the observed.
We aren't attempting to alter the physical laws of the universe with our thoughts.
No, not at all. We're simply attempting to fix the deeply flawed mechanical map we drew of those physical laws. This entire chapter is a via negativa. It's a systematic clearing away of corrupted conceptual maps before he can even begin to survey the actual territory.
All right, so through this immanent critique, he has successfully cornered the physicists. He proved that their 19th century mechanical view of matter is a deeply flawed map, and he did it by using the logic of biological evolution against them.
Flawlessly executed.
But wait, that assumes the biological concept of evolution is flawless, right? He just used Darwin's theory as its ultimate weapon. Did he really just give the biologists a free pass?
Oh, not at all. And this is where the sheer ambition of the chapter reveals itself.
He turns on them, too.
He absolutely does.
No.
Having used evolution to destroy mechanical physics, he turns around and points the exact same immanent critical weapon at biology itself. He goes straight for the foundational text, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution.
No one is safe.
No one. He aims to prove that biologists are making the exact same mechanical mapping errors as the physicists.
This section of the text is utterly fascinating to me because he targets a very specific component of Darwin's theory, sexual selection. Smuts points out that if you actually read Darwin, the mechanics of sexual selection are not driven by blind physical forces at all. They are fundamentally psychical or emotional drivers. And he uses this classic example of the peacock and the peahen.
The peacock's extravagant tail feathers, which are iconic, right?
Right, and from a strictly mechanical survival standpoint, those feathers are a massive liability.
A huge liability. I mean, they require immense metabolic energy to grow, they make the bird highly visible to predators, and they make it incredibly difficult to fly away from danger.
Exactly. They are basically a giant neon sign saying, "Eat me." But they evolve anyway. And Smuts focuses on the peahen's role in this. The peahen's appreciation for those incredible feathers implies this amazing, almost superhuman emotional sensitiveness and aesthetic discrimination.
She's not just a passive observer.
No, the peahen is making a choice. That choice is based on beauty, on preference, on attraction. The motive force driving the genetic evolution of those massive feathers isn't the blind mechanical force of a hailstorm or a drought. The motive force is highly psychological.
It is driven by excitement and desire. Smuts takes this observation and expands it. He points out that if sexual selection shapes the morphology of countless species across the globe, then a massive, undeniable driver of biological evolution is entirely psychical.
It has to be.
The biologists cannot claim evolution as a purely mechanical process of blind physical forces when one of its primary engines is driven by emotional preference.
But Smuts doesn't stop at sexual selection, which is the crazy part. He makes a much more daring, somewhat controversial claim. He argues that even natural selection itself, the ruthless core engine of survival of the fittest, has been fundamentally misunderstood and wrongly viewed as a purely mechanical process.
He does. He argues that 19th century science looked at natural selection the same way you look at a natural disaster.
Right, like a hailstorm wiping out a field of wheat or a drought starving a herd, just indifferent, blind physical forces acting on passive biological matter.
But Smuts insists this is a mass evolution, and he diagnoses the specific cognitive error causing the illusion, which he calls the error of statistical abstraction.
Statistical abstraction. Okay, we need to unpack that.
We do. And this brings us to a critical juncture, where we really have to incorporate the 2026 Centenary Review's pushback, because Smuts walks a very fine line here.
Yeah, Pretorius had some notes on this section.
Definitely. So Smuts argues that natural selection only appears mechanical because scientists view it from an immense distance. They are aggregating millions of events into a generalized statistical average.
They're just looking at spreadsheets.
Exactly. He argues that when you abandon the statistics and zoom in to the actual reality on the ground, the struggle for survival isn't a spreadsheet. It is composed of infinite little concrete struggles.
Right. It's individual organisms fighting desperately for their lives, protecting their offspring, coordinating with their tribes.
Yes. And because these localized struggles involve effort, fear, and adaptation, Smuts makes the claim that natural selection as a whole is therefore essentially psychical.
The way I visualize his argument is by thinking about a massive military conflict. It is like looking at a war from a satellite in low Earth orbit.
That's a really good way to picture it.
Right. From space, the troop movements look exactly like fluid mechanics. It just looks like Blind physical forces pushing against each other, a red blob of troops slowly overtaking a blue blob of troops.
It looks entirely mechanical and mathematical from up there.
Exactly. But if you take a camera and zoom all the way down into the actual trench, there is absolutely nothing mechanical about what is happening. The reality in the trench is highly psychical. It is driven by sheer terror, incredible courage, panic, and split-second cognitive decisions.
You're dealing with individual minds in a panic state.
Right. So Smuts is accusing 19th century biology of getting permanently stuck in the satellite view. They're looking at the abstract statistics of survival rates and completely forgetting the psychical effort happening in the biological trenches.
The military analogy perfectly captures Smuts' methodological critique. He's absolutely right to warn scientists that statistical models inevitably erase the lived reality of individual biological interactions. However, the Centenary critics argue quite forcefully that Smuts makes a significant, unsupported logical leap here.
He goes too far.
He does. Methodologically, his warning is brilliant. Ontologically, he jumps too far. He claims that because individual biological encounters have psychological or effort-based elements, the systemic force of natural selection itself must be essentially psychical.
Yeah, he lets his desire to defeat mechanical science push him into a corner where he overstates the presence of mind in basic biology.
He does. But we have to keep in mind the context, right? In 1926, the scientific community lacked the conceptual tools that would emerge later in the century.
Right, they didn't have the math yet.
No. Smuts had no access to game theory, modern population genetics, or the mathematics of kin selection.
Which changed everything.
Completely. These modern tools demonstrate clearly how highly complex, cooperative, and seemingly thoughtful behaviors at the individual level can actually emerge from entirely non-psychical, blind selection dynamics operating at the population level.
So you don't actually need mind to explain complex behavior.
Right. So while Smuts jumped too far by claiming natural selection was essentially a psychical force, his underlying methodological warning remains incredibly prescient today. Do not allow your statistical averages and mathematical models to erase the concrete, messy reality of biological interaction.
You cannot claim to understand the whole system by only looking at the aggregated math.
You just can't.
This raises a massive historical question for me. If the physicists were making this fundamental mapping mistake by viewing all matter as completely dead and inert, and the biologists were making a parallel mistake by viewing evolution as just a statistical, mechanical hailstorm, why?
Why did everyone get it wrong at the same time?
Yeah. Why did the entirety of 19th century science get globally trapped in this rigid, mechanical, satellite view of the universe? Smuts doesn't view these as isolated errors, does he?
No, not at all. He traces the entire disease back to a single, shared philosophical dogma regarding the nature of cause and effect.
Okay, this is a huge part of the chapter.
It is. This requires us to really understand the mindset of the 19th century scientific revolution. This was the era of the Industrial Revolution, of thermodynamics, of the steam engine.
Right, the world was becoming mechanized.
Very mechanized. The greatest minds of the era were obsessed with what Smuts calls limited exactitude. They abhorred vagueness. They wanted the entire universe to operate like a perfectly balanced, enormous ledger.
Input equals output.
Exactly. You put a specific amount of coal into the engine, you get a highly predictable, exact amount of mechanical energy out. This obsession birthed a fixed, unbreakable dogma in their worldview. There could be no more in the effect than there was in the cause.
The causal adequacy dogma, the absolute rule that you can never get out more than you put in. 2 plus 2 will only ever equal 4, and it will never, under any circumstances, magically equal 5.
It sounds incredibly logical, completely bulletproof at first glance, right?
Yeah, it just sounds like basic math.
If you suggest that an effect can exceed its cause, you sound like a charlatan trying to invent a perpetual motion machine.
Right, they'd laugh you out of the patent office.
Exactly. But Smuts points out the devastating, catastrophic consequence this dogma has when you try to apply it to evolution. If the effect can never, ever exceed the cause, then genuine creativity, real emergence, and true evolutionary progress in the universe are mathematically and philosophically impossible.
Wait, really? Why?
Because if every single new biological species is nothing more than a rearrangement of the exact same physical inputs for the previous species, then evolution isn't actually creating anything new.
Oh.
It isn't going anywhere. Smuts calls this nightmare scenario static evolution. It's just the universe endlessly rearranging the deck chairs, but never producing anything truly novel.
Ah, I see. If mind supposedly evolved from matter, but the effect can't possibly exceed the cause, then mind is just matter in a different shape. There's nothing truly new or special about consciousness, it's just a complex illusion. And this specific tension leads to what I think is the most beautiful historical observation in the entire chapter. Smuts looks back at the great, vicious 19th-century culture wars between the scientific materialists and the religious spiritualists.
This is a brilliant deconstruction of a historical conflict.
It really is. So, the materialists argued that since matter caused mind, and the effect can exceed the cause, mind is just a mechanical byproduct that has no real agency.
Right.
But the spiritualists looked at that and said, that's absurd. Mind is clearly greater than matter. But since an effect can't be greater than its cause, mind could never have evolved from matter.
Because you can't get something from nothing.
Right. So the spiritualists just denied evolution entirely and insisted a divine creator had to inject mind into the universe from the outside. These two camps fought bitterly for decades, ruining careers and dividing society.
It was a massive cultural war.
And Smuts steps into the aftermath of this war and basically says, you were both entirely wrong because you both based your entire worldviews on the exact same flawed dogma of causal adequacy.
He exposes the tragedy of the conflict. Both sides implicitly accepted the rigid accounting rule that you can't get more out of a system than you put into it.
Yeah.
That shared, unquestioned premise was the real enemy, not either of the extreme positions that were forced to emerge from it.
The imagery Smuts uses here is incredibly striking. He writes, today we pick the poppies on the old bloody battlefield of evolution and can afford to be fair to both sides.
Wow.
Yeah. We have to remember that Smuts was a former general. He literally commanded troops in the field and served in the Imperial War Cabinet during World War I. He knows exactly the weight of the imagery he is deploying there.
He's not using the word battlefield lightly.
No. He is standing on the intellectual equivalent of the Somme, looking at these two deeply entrenched camps that utterly destroyed each other over a false premise.
The military metaphor is so potent, and it raises a crucial point regarding Smuts's long-term legacy in the history of science.
Right.
His relentless critique of the causal adequacy dogma is arguably the most prescient, accurate part of this entire chapter.
How's...
Well, you fast forward 100 years to modern emergence theory, nonlinear dynamics, and complexity science. They totally agree with Smuts' fundamental intuition.
So he was right.
He was completely right. In closed, strictly mechanical, artificial systems like a steam engine, the causal adequacy dogma holds true. The effect equals the cause.
Okay.
But in open, highly complex systems like a biological ecology or the human brain or a global climate system, the specific organization and relationship of the elements absolutely does produce novel properties that were not present in the causes.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure, consider water. A water molecule is fundamentally wet. But if you isolate the hydrogen and oxygen atoms that cause it, neither of them possesses the property of wetness.
Right. A single atom isn't wet.
Exactly. Wetness is an emergent property. Smuts recognized this a century early. He realized that to allow for a universe that is genuinely creative and evolutionary, you have to completely abandon the absolute mechanical equation of cause and effect.
Okay, so if this rigid input equals output dogma is mathematically wrong for complex systems, where did it come from? I mean, it didn't just fall out of the sky and infect the minds of 19th-century physicists.
No, it has psychological roots.
Right. Smuts argues it is a symptom of a much deeper, more insidious cognitive habit. It is a flaw in how the human brain naturally processes and breaks down information to survive. And he diagnoses this habit as two distinct, massive errors in human thinking: the error of analysis and the error of abstraction.
Let's unpack the error analysis first, because Smuts is very careful with how he positions himself here.
He doesn't want to sound like he hates science.
Exactly. He is not mounting an anti-science crusade. He explicitly admits that breaking complex phenomena down into isolated, manageable parts is the only way science makes tangible progress.
And have to do it.
You have to. You have to isolate variables in a laboratory to understand their specific mechanics. But, he argues, this necessary tool comes with a massive, often unacknowledged risk.
It is the classic problem of taking a pocket watch apart to understand how it keeps time.
Precisely. You learn a great deal about gears and springs by taking the watch apart. But the fundamental error occurs during the reassembly phase.
When you put it back together.
Yeah. Smuts argues that when we break a complex, integrated situation down into conceptual or physical elements and then attempt to mentally or physically reconstruct it, something always escapes.
And always.
Always. The reconstructed situation is never, ever exactly the original. We inevitably lose the context, the environment, the subtle, fluid connections between the parts. That unavoidable loss of context is the error of analysis.
I want to spend some time on this because this is where the real-world implications hit hard. Let's expand on the classic biology class example, dissecting a frog.
A perfect example.
Right. You take a living frog, pin it to a board, and begin to isolate its systems. You carefully remove the heart to study its chambers. You isolate the lungs to study respiration. You extract the nervous system to study impulses.
Very analytical.
Right, and you gain incredible vital data about the parts. That is the legitimate power of analysis. But what fundamentally escaped during that analytical process?
The life of the frog.
The life of the frog. By pausing the system to analyze its components, you have destroyed the very system you were trying to understand. The frog is dead.
Right.
Now, here's where it shifts from the error of analysis to the second, far more dangerous error. If you take that messy pile of isolated dead organs, point to it, and declare to your students, behold, this pile of parts is what a frog truly is, well, you have just committed the error of abstraction.
He sometimes refers to it as the error of generalization, but abstraction is really the more powerful term.
You have taken the abstract, isolated elements, the heart, the lungs, and arbitrarily decided that they are the only real operative entities in the universe.
Then you've dismissed the whole.
Exactly. And you have simultaneously decided that the original complex living frog was merely a derivative product, a secondary, almost illusory result of those parts randomly interacting. You have fundamentally inverted reality. The conceptual map has literally eaten the physical territory.
It is a profound, penetrating insight into the psychological vulnerabilities of the scientific method.
It really makes you question how we do science.
It does. Because the isolated parts are simpler, because they are stripped of messy context, and because they admit to much closer mathematical scrutiny and controlled experiment, the human mind starts to worship those parts as the ultimate reality.
We fall in love with the data.
Yes. Physics does this exact same thing by breaking solid bodies down into electrons and protons, and then philosophically declaring that only the electrons and protons are truly real, while the solid oak table you are resting your elbows on is somehow a secondary illusion.
It's amazing Smuts actually compares this exact modern scientific fallacy to the scholastic philosophers of the Middle Ages.
Yes, I love that part. The medieval scholastics had a habit of attributing ultimate reality to abstract universals, like they believed the abstract concept of horseness was more real than the concrete particular muddy horse standing in the field eating grass.
Which sounds insane to us now.
Right. Smuts argues that 19th-century mechanical science committed the exact same cognitive fallacy, just in reverse. Instead of worshiping a macro abstraction, they attributed ultimate reality to microscopic abstractions, completely dismissing the concrete, lived experience of the whole organism as a secondary illusion.
What's fascinating is that we can actually watch Smuts wrestling with how to best communicate this specific error when we look at the Variorum text. The specific changes he made between the 1926, 1927, and 1936 editions.
The textual edits are so telling.
They really are. For example, in the original 1926 printing, he complained that the science of biology was being placed under the iron rule of force by the science of physics, but by the time the 1936 edition rolled around, he softened that exact phrase to the dead hand of matter. He also went through and changed his description of the various divisions of scientific knowledge. Originally, he called them sovereign kingdoms, but later changed the word to bureaucratic compartments. As an expert analyzing the text, why do you think he made those specific, subtle changes a decade later?
The Variorum changes are incredibly revealing because they reflect a subtle but profound shift in his diagnosis of the core problem.
Okay, how so?
Well, the original phrase, iron rule of force, implies an active, malicious tyrant. It suggests that physics is aggressively and intentionally conquering biology. It's very militaristic framing.
Right, like an invasion.
Exactly. But changing it to the dead hand of matter shifts the blame to a passive, systemic obstruction. It implies that reductionist science isn't some evil empire actively trying to destroy truth. It's just a dead weight.
It's just inertia.
Right. It's a bad bureaucratic habit of sorting reality into isolated compartments. It stifles our understanding of living, breathing reality, not through malice, but through sheer conceptual inertia. He realizes the enemy isn't the discipline of physics itself. The true enemy is the bureaucratic compartmentalization of our own thinking.
That is such a crucial distinction. Okay, let's take stock of the demolition so far. If the mechanical view of matter is fundamentally wrong, if reducing a living frog to a pile of organs is an inversion of reality, and if breaking the universe down into concepts with hard, impenetrable contours inevitably creates these massive errors in our understanding,
Right.
what is his positive solution?
Right, he has to offer something.
Exactly. What exactly is the elusive thing that escapes when we analyze the frog? How do we map the territory without destroying it? Smuts finally pivots from destruction to construction, and he introduces the most important technical concept in the chapter:
The concept of the field.
the field. Smuts argues that if we ever want to get back to the fluid plastic facts of nature, we have to completely eliminate these hard, artificial scientific contours. We have to stop drawing thick black lines around our concepts, isolating them from their environment.
He introduces this concept using language that is beautiful, almost poetic, but highly technical in its intent.
The language is stunning here.
It is. He argues that every object, every living thing, and even every abstract concept is not just a luminous center ending at a defined boundary. It doesn't end cleanly where his physical surface stops.
Right.
Instead, every entity is surrounded by expansive zones, what he calls aurae or penumbrae, that shade off into indefiniteness.
The penumbra,
Yeah.
like the fuzzy glowing shadow surrounding a solar eclipse.
Yes.
The boundary isn't a wall, it's a gradient.
A perfect visualization. He argues that the fundamental reality of the universe does not consist of isolated, hard-edged atoms occasionally bumping into each other in a void. Reality is a complex, overlapping topology of field.
Overlap.
Yes, and his crucial point is that it is only within these overlapping, fuzzy, indefinite penumbrae that real connections, real causality, and genuine creative interactions can occur. A hard, secluded, perfectly defined concept is entirely barren. It is conceptually sterile. It cannot interact with anything because it refuses to overlap.
He has this incredibly evocative phrase in the text. He writes that without these overlapping fields, without the penumbra, the world is reduced to nothing more than a scrap heap of disjecta membra, scattered, severed limbs.
Just a pile of disconnected parts.
Yeah, just pieces. It's the fluid, overlapping fields that finally bridge the great gaps between matter, life, and mind.
And here we must pause and appreciate the sheer scientific prescience of the vocabulary he is trying to develop.
Yeah, the Centenary Review made a big deal out of this.
They did. They make a massive point of noting that Smuts introduced this biological and philosophical field concept in 1926. This is exactly the moment when quantum field theory in physics was in its absolute chaotic infancy. Smuts actually explicitly compares his biological and philosophical idea to James Clerk Maxwell's theory of electromagnetic fields.
He's borrowing from the bleeding edge of physics.
He is. He is taking a mathematical concept from cutting-edge theoretical physics and making a massive leap, suggesting this is how everything works. Not just electromagnetism, but biology, psychology, sociology, and evolution.
Which is mind-blowing for 1926.
It is. A century later, field theory, network science, and systems thinking are the absolute, unquestioned foundations of how we understand everything from global ecology to the neural networks powering artificial intelligence.
He saw it coming.
He did. Smuts anticipated, decades before the math existed to prove it, that reality is fundamentally about connectivity and relationships, not just isolated particles.
That brings us to the climax of the chapter, and the 2026 commentators point out a glaring, brilliant irony right at the finish line here.
Oh, this is my favorite part.
It's so funny. We have just watched Smuts spend 20 dense pages ruthlessly attacking the danger of abstractions. He relentlessly attacked the abstraction of causal adequacy. He dismantled the statistical averages of Darwinism, and he tore apart the abstraction of reducing the frog to its organs.
He hated abstraction.
Hated them. And then, in the very last paragraphs of the chapter, he introduces his grand programmatic statement to solve all of these problems, and he invents a massive, capitalized, universal abstraction.
He really does.
He introduces the concept of the process. He declares that matter, life, and mind are all just intimately connected steps in the same great cosmic process. Did he just stumble into his own trap? Did he commit the error of abstraction on the very last page of the chapter?
It's an incredibly sharp question, and it represents the central internal tension of the entire chapter.
Yeah.
Yes, the process is undeniably a massive abstraction. It is a giant conceptual bucket. But we have to remember the architectural structure of Chapter 1 that we established at the very beginning. It is a via negativa. Its primary function was to clear the intellectual brush, to aggressively destroy the bad conceptual maps.
Okay.
He uses the process purely as a temporary structural placeholder for the detailed framework he will eventually name holism in the subsequent chapters.
Ah, I see. It's a structural necessity for the argument. He has to point the reader toward the destination, even if he hasn't laid the pavement for the road yet.
Precisely. And Smuts is remarkably, refreshingly honest about this limitation. He states explicitly in the text that holistic concepts must not devolve into mere vague metaphysical formulae.
They can't just be poetry.
Exactly, they cannot just be poetry. They must eventually provide exact, verifiable scientific service with the same rigor as the mechanical concepts they are intended to replace.
That's a high bar.
He sets an incredibly high, almost punishing bar for his own philosophy. He openly admits in Chapter 1 that he hasn't proved anything yet. He has merely diagnosed the fatal disease of 19th century thought. The remaining hundreds of pages of the book are the grueling attempt to formulate the verifiable cure.
Wow. Okay, let's take a deep breath and recap this incredible journey for you, the listener, because we have covered an entire century of complex philosophy here.
We really have.
We've seen how J.C. Smuts used the literal 1926 layout of a printed page, the weaponized capitalization, the three-paragraph genetic summary to visually assert a new reality. We watched him lay a trap using the logic of biological evolution to completely destroy the mechanical, inert view of physical matter. We saw him dismantle the causal adequacy dogma to allow for actual, genuine creativity and emergence in the universe. And we explored how he introduced the concept of overlapping indefinite fields to fix the deadly scientific errors of analysis and abstraction.
Given all of that, the critical question remains. Why does a dense 1926 philosophy text matter to you right now?
Why should we care today?
It matters because you face the error of abstraction every single day of your life. Whenever you feel an overwhelming sense of frustration because the modern world is attempting to reduce your life, your labor, or your complex human behavior into mere data points, into algorithms, into consumer statistics, or into rigid, hard contours. Remember J.C. Smuts.
It is the exact feeling you get when a social media algorithm decides you are nothing more than a highly specific consumer profile based on just a few clicks.
It is the exact same dynamic.
Uh-huh.
You're experiencing the modern iteration of the era of abstraction. You are the frog being conceptually dissected and reduced to a pile of isolated organs by a data broker or a corporate algorithm.
But that's a terrifying thought.
It is. But Smuts serves as a powerful reminder that fundamental reality does not happen within those isolated abstract data points. Reality happens in the fluid, messy, overlapping fields. It happens in the penumbra.
The blur.
Yes. That fuzzy, indefinite area of connection is where human life, creativity, and genuine progress actually exist.
Which brings me to a final, provocative thought I want to leave you with, building on everything we've unpacked today. Smuts successfully proved that 19th century science was completely, fundamentally blind to the reality of life and mind, not because they lacked intelligence, but because their vocabulary, their rigid concepts of cause, effect, and matter, was just too hard.
They literally lacked the conceptual words required to describe a fluid, overlapping reality.
They were hopelessly trapped in the bureaucratic compartments of their own making.
Totally trapped.
So look around us today at the biggest challenges of our era. What if our current 21st century struggles to definitively understand human consciousness, or our desperate attempts to govern artificial intelligence, or our inability to heal deep systemic societal polarization? What if those massive efforts are stalling for the exact same reason?
That's a profound question.
What if we aren't missing data? What if we possess all the empirical facts we need, but we are simply trapped by our own modern hard contours? What if we are waiting for someone to point out the overlapping fields we are currently ignoring?
We are still standing in the hospital, looking at the X-ray screen, demanding to see a clean, simple white line that simply isn't there.
We are staring at a murky diagnostic landscape, desperately waiting for an easy binary answer that just doesn't exist. The answers to our biggest questions aren't found in the hard lines. They are found in the blur. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning your concepts.